will start asking you about this project, how you make it, how you bring it to life.
Well, I first came here about just over 15 years ago, and I met Andy 4 years after that. And I think when he came here, he saw the garden and the project and fell in love with that more than me.
That's not true.
But yeah, it's taken for this artist retreat over 10 years of very hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And I had done the electrics, and when Andy came, he redid the roof with a friend, and then we started on the building itself. Andy worked very hard repointing all the stone in line.
But we could only do a day a week because we have other jobs, so it was kind of very, very slow. It took us many years to get just this room ready, didn't it, really?
Yeah. And then during the break between the two lockdowns in COVID, during the pandemic, a friend came to see our organic vegetable garden and suggested we apply for a leadership fund grant to finish the project as an artist facility. And it's the only one of its kind in Donegal. So it was a very big application form, and we managed to get it done.
It's European funding.
It's European funding. So they helped us with the funding to finish the rest of the building, which we were very grateful for.
So we had a gang of builders, didn't we, for probably a year, really, to finish the project, to do the groundworks outside, and they had me chasing around them to make sure it was done right, hopefully, mostly right. And we finished in July last year, 22.
Yeah. So
when we had our first guest.
Yeah. And our first guest was the musician Claire Sands, and they created a piece of music about Inishowen as part of an Arts Council funded project. So we were delighted with that. Yeah. And really this summer has been our first summer completely open, and we've had artists from, where have we had artists from?
England.
London,
yes.
Photographers from London, artists from Illinois, and
Scotland,
Pasadena, California.
Yeah. Now we have French and Romanian guests.
French and Romanian guests currently, as you can see. And they all seem to fall in love with the place and enjoy the atmosphere of the building. So we're delighted that it's working and encouraging people to be creative. Which is the main point.
I understood that you did the electrics.
I did, yeah. I got
how it means that you did the electrics, please? Can you explain?
Well,
you watched somebody do the electrics.
I got a friend of mine, Gregory, he's a lovely guy, and he got one of his friends to come over from England, and the two of them looked at the electric wiring in this house and redid everything for me. So that was in place before Andy arrived.
They were trained electricians. It wasn't just a couple of friends who did it, but they were proper electricians. And that was where the building stopped for a while, didn't it?
Yes.
It had the electrics, and the roof was okay, but the far end where the bedrooms are, the roof was rotten and it was leaking and it was just wet. So
yeah, there was turf and animals in that part of the building, so
we
a lot
had
of work.
Yeah, we had a vision for a long-term project, but it's happened a lot quicker than I think we actually imagined at the end of it anyway.
Yeah, and we're very pleased with it.
And please tell something about your painting class.
So I have been facilitating creative development and painting and art for over 27 years. A lot of it began in Belfast in cross-community work and single identity projects all over Belfast with different communities and traditions. And so I've always been working in encouraging people to be creative. And so when the pandemic hit, I was working, or before that I was working, travelling around all over Donegal and Northern Ireland in a little van with my materials to different schools and communities. And then, of course, my work stopped because it depended on going into communities and working in large groups. And that's when we decided that the project of the cottage needed to really come towards completion, because it would be a way of me employing myself without having to travel very far and work in small groups. So in the cottage here in this studio, I take small groups of people specifically for painting, and how to use brushes as a tool to express themselves, and using the paint to move around the canvas and create beautiful things for themselves, and as a way of healing your own creativity, because I really think everybody is creative, and sometimes when we're children we notice when the teacher gives praise to individuals who maybe create in a way that pleases them, and then we think our work is not good, and we stop, and we become very self-doubting and very self-critical about our creativity. But so I try to encourage people out of that way of thinking. I really think being creative is part of our holistic well-being, as well as exercise for the body. You need exercise for the creative mind, and I just love it. I love seeing the spark in people's eyes, that they can achieve something, that they can make something, and that it's not about what they produce, it's about the act of making or being involved in creating. It's about the mind space and the breathing for the mind. When you're making something, you stop thinking about everything else. You don't think about what's for dinner, you don't think about what the children need, you don't think about next week. You're just focused, and this is so good for the brain, and it helps your brain relax. And there's a lot of healing that can go on in this space as well. And I have a master's in counselling and therapeutic communication, so that often gets brought into what I'm doing in the creative way also. So I really enjoy bringing people forward in their creativity, but also in their positive attitude towards themselves and what they can achieve in life. So it's really important.
And what about your students? About ages, about how they growing up in this your class?
I see a lot of positive development, and it's really about the act of playfulness in creating. So the ages, I used to work with everybody from toddlers to...
Toddlers?
Yeah, I used to work with everybody, but now I focus on painting. So that's my speciality. I can teach anybody to paint, absolutely anybody. And I can bring out their creativity. I have lots of experience in doing this with all sorts of different personality types. But I focus on adults and young people now, and I teach, I'm starting a group of teenagers, specifically on painting. Yeah, good luck. But it's all about the attitude and about how you look at things and observe things. So the adults, a lot of men at times, but mostly women. And I think there's that element of when you're a woman with a family, you give up so much of yourself to see to other people's needs. And you know, when your family starts to grow and you get more time to yourself, if that ever happens, it's when you try to invest in yourself again and to kind of indulge those activities that you thought you would, you know, you put things on hold for a long time, and then you get a little bit of time to maybe take up new hobbies and to explore yourself as a person again. So I enjoy that. A lot of people come here because they want to improve their painting, and for example, I worked with a photographer from London who wanted to bring oil painting into her photography practice. So that was a learning curve for me. I'm always learning as well, and we had a great time. It was just really enjoyable experimenting and with the creative process and seeing what could happen. So yeah.
Please, a few words about your style as a painter. Now, just about yourself.
Right. Well, I started probably a bit like everybody as a hobby artist, and painting portraits and looking at realism, trying to create what was in front of me. But I soon realised that the way I use the brush and the way I see painting as a collaboration between myself, my brushes, and the paint and the canvas. And sometimes the paint wants to do something different, and there are different marks that sometimes just happen that can be very beautiful. So I have learned to relax and allow those marks to come through. So I work quite instinctively like that, and I use the cloth a lot as well as the paintbrush, and sometimes, which is not so not so great with my fingers, because I can't help myself getting stuck in to move the paint a little bit more. But my style is really impressionistic expressionism, and I like to create work that is speaking to the mind and the soul, and the sort of to bring out work that asks questions. So when you see the work, you think, okay, so what is that about, and what is she saying, and what are the different elements in this painting? And technically, I know my material. I know a lot about oil paint and about mediums and how to create different effects onto the canvas. But I like to explore and ask questions. So my work recently in an exhibition was to do with how time and space can fold. So I created lots of origami pieces on Fabriano paper, which is an Italian paper, and I create the structure and then I paint on it, and the movement around this rigid piece of paper sculpture kind of is a contradiction, and it's to do with how time and space can exist within a flow. There's a lot of rigidity about how we experience time, and in the Western world we consider time to be linear, whereas in other cultures time is sort of like a systemic flow, and things can exist in the past and in the future and now all in one point. So without getting too technical, some of the work that I've created recently asks questions about quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement, and how two quantities can intimately know what the other, if you think of it as two people or two points of consciousness, they know exactly what is happening with the other instantaneously, even though they're far, far apart, like millions of miles. So that's quantum entanglement. And when you have a piece of origami and it folds down like this, and the 2 points are touching, and then suddenly you open it like this and it expands, then it's just such a beautiful thing to consider the time and space in between those points, and suddenly the past, the present, the future, you kind of get the feeling that they don't mean what we think it does, that time and energy flow around constantly and intertwine with everything we do and who we are.
So it means that the Dali painting with the clock, that it is falling down and becomes fluid. It is telling a lot of things about your painting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that seeps into the idea of surrealist painting, like the melting of time, the Dali, and the elongation of things. That there's this nothing is constant.
Do you sell your pictures all over the world? Do you have?
I do.
Yes.
I do. I have
in
a
what?
website.
In what countries? We can see your paintings.
I have a piece in an exhibition in the Kinar Foundation in Mumbai, in India, very soon. And I have shown work in Glasgow in the project room with an international group of artists called the Drawing Box. So, I'm very lucky that I get to show my work and I can have that opportunity to reach other people and have it seen. It's not always about selling your work, it's more about making it, and I see art and my painting as a form of communication, so I allow myself that ability to speak to other people through my work in a visual form, and I hope that people see it and can reflect on the world and everything in it.
You have pieces you've sold pieces privately that a lot of people own in various parts of the world, don't you?
Yeah.
Across Ireland and England and in Europe and America.
Yeah. So.
And Andy, what about your creativity?
I'm not a painter, that's for sure. I've tried. I know Sinead would say there's creativity in everybody, like she's just explained, but gardening is my form of creativity. So outside the cottage here we have a garden that I've worked on. So growing plants is my creative outlet, I guess, and that's what I enjoy doing the most. I do take photographs.
You were an award.
I did win an award a number of years ago for a photograph of Sinead and our, as he was then, son, well he still is our son, a young son, he was only a few weeks old. So that won an award at the Derek Hill Award at the Lead Gallery. So I was very pleased with that. But again, I'm a hobbyist photographer. I love taking photographs. I've taken photographs for years, moved into digital and have a lot sitting on my computer that I don't do much with, but maybe one day I'll get the time to do something with them. But yeah, it is. So gardening and photography, and you can combine those as well, because gardens can be very photogenic, so taking pictures of what you've done.
You have a passion for growing trees and you take a lot of photographs for your website.
Yeah, I mean, I run a website business, working for a lot of clients across the UK and Ireland, but I have my own website about growing trees, because that's the original reason I came to Ireland, was to work on a tree growing project.
That's how we met.
That's how we met, yeah.
Originally,
So I'm very passionate about trees in the natural world. So I have a website where people can learn about how they can grow trees.
It's native. What is it?
We don't need to promote it, but it's nativetreesfromseed.com. But yeah, it's a website that a lot of my photographs are on. So take photographs of trees and go onto the website. So I guess that's my creative outlet.
And what kind of trees are you gardening? Are you?
So mostly when I was growing trees, it was the native trees that would have made up the woodlands around Northern Ireland as I was working in. Northern Ireland, and Ireland as a whole, as one of the least wooded areas in Europe historically. So there was a lot of interest in recreating woodlands, and they wanted local trees, native trees. So it was things like oak and hawthorn and ash and rowan and you know the usual native ones. But in the garden, excuse me, in the garden we're a little bit more exotic, and we plant for wildlife. So the native plants are great for wildlife, but we can encourage more animals into the garden by flowers that produce, or by putting plants that produce flowers over a longer period, for example. So we would be a little bit more exotic in the garden, but we have plenty of native plants as well.
Whether you think you're a creative person or not, please know that creativity is part of our survival instinct. If you could not make something like fire or shelter or clothing, then you couldn't survive. So we are all instinctively creative, and whether you express that through choosing your wardrobe or how you look or your shoes, or whether you want to investigate that further by exploring some form of craft or painting even, then I would recommend it highly as part of your own personal development, and you'll get great joy and achievement from it. So please do investigate your own creativity.
So Andy, I hear a lot of people saying that it is hard to have apple trees in Ireland. Is that true?
I'm not sure it's true that it's hard to have them. Sometimes in this part of the world where we're so far north, it can be a challenge to get the apples to ripen. The trees themselves grow really well. The ones that we planted here, they're about 10 or 12 years in the ground, and they're just about reaching some kind of maturity. We pruned them very hard a couple of years ago, so they're only just coming back to fruit, but some years we've had hundreds of fruits from just one of these small apple trees. So they grow very well. It's just getting the apples to ripen to a point where they're ready to eat is the challenge.
So please tell me something about your polytunnel.
Yeah, well, this is, if you want to grow vegetables in this part of the world, you need a polytunnel, certainly for anything that requires a little bit of heat. So in here, in the summertime, we would grow, we still have one courgette plant that's producing courgettes, but we would grow tomatoes, chilies, peppers, cucumbers. Cucumbers do really well in here, but if we tried to grow them outside, not a chance. The onions and the pumpkins and the other, with garlic over there, and some other onions which we've harvested, so it's a great place to dry things off, ready for storage for the winter. Again, it's so wet here that if we left them outside, they'd very quickly either start growing or rotting again, so this is the best way for us to prepare them for the winter. So we don't have a huge amount of onions this year, but that'll probably last us well into next year anyway. And a few pumpkins for Halloween. A few very baby pumpkins as well, as you can see. So this is a tunnel that we would see most activity really in here from February onwards next year. So we'll tidy it up over the winter time, and we should have some overwintering salads in here, but we've nothing in here this year because we were so busy with the cottage. But we'll get them in for next year. So it should be able to give us vegetables, certainly salads, 12 months of the year, when outside there's not so much growing. It's part of our sort of philosophy of growing for wildlife, is these are sprouts. They'll still produce small sprouts, but something is eating them. We have a huge problem with snails and slugs in this part of the world because of the damp climate and the mild climate. It never gets really very cold here. So
and you are not using pesticides?
No, we're completely organic. We make our own compost, so in the little building that we constructed last year, everything from the cottage, the house, the garden, all of the organic waste goes back into the garden. And we garden in a way, people call it no dig. So we don't dig, but we top dress the soil every year, once, maybe twice, which is a very natural way of gardening. If you think of how trees would shed their leaves in the winter, so the soil kind of builds up. We do the same way. So there's 2 or 3 beds over there where we've actually planted onions and garlic. They look empty, but we've dressed them with the compost. So the soil creatures, the worms and such like. So it's these 4 here. So the worms and the other fungus, the fungi and the bacteria in the soil will break it down over the winter and feed the plants directly. So we don't apply any fertilizer, we don't use any chemicals. We come out at night and we remove slugs and snails by hand. It's the only way to really do it safely, because as you see, we feed the birds, because we try and attract the birds in to do a lot of the work for us.
All these things you learn by yourself, because I understood you don't have studies in this field of gardening.
No. I think my mum gave me a piece of her garden in Manchester when I was about 6 years old, and I remember growing a sunflower in school, in primary school. And
sunflower?
Yeah, sunflower. So we just put a seed around the outside of a jam jar, so you could actually see there was sand inside and then some blotting paper, I think. And the seed was pushed between the glass and the blotting paper, so you could actually see the root of the sunflower and then the shoot. And I remember planting it in the garden, and that's one of my first memories from school. So I was obviously had some connection with plants from that early age. And then when I was about 18, 19, I started to think about the environment and conservation and so on. And gardening is really a natural progression from that. We have so many of our own spaces that we can manage. And around here, many people just have grass in front of their houses, which is okay for a few starlings or crows, but it's not really great for all of the other creatures that we have. So a more natural garden helps support a wider diversity of creatures. We don't do much to them. We sow the vegetables. There's a little bit of fennel in there, which was sown a little bit late, but the carrots are okay. That's a red type of carrot, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we have no diseases, no carrot root fly, which is a problem with carrots, and that was just sown in the ground probably in about June. And that'll give us carrots through the winter at least anyway. So that's one of the vegetables. Fruit does really well here, so we're pretty much self-sufficient in strawberries and black currants and red currants and gooseberries and things like that. They like this sort of climate. And then the winter vegetables behind you there, things like kale, which will grow through the coldest of weather and provide very simple but wholesome food during the winter time for us. And we have parsnips and beetroot and celeriac, and so there's mostly winter vegetables in here now, which we'll harvest between now and probably January, and then we'll have a period where we have to buy veg from the shops, which is a bit unfortunate, but we can't be completely self-sufficient here, unfortunately. We don't have we have the space, but we also like to garden for ourselves as well as for the vegetables. We can eat that literally within 2 minutes, or you can eat it out of the ground, but you can eat it within minutes of it being picked. So it's, I suppose, technically still alive, which sounds a bit sounds a bit harsh, but you know, obviously it's a vegetable, and you get the maximum amount of goodness. They haven't been transported anywhere. You know, they've not been sprayed with anything, so it's about as natural as you can get. We would buy through the year, but obviously at times where there's a harvest, so probably from July, August, September, October, that's when we have the maximum amount of vegetables. We try to be self-sufficient in salad leaves where we can. We have a few more over there, but there's not many. We would need to have them in the polytunnel. But through the rest of the year, we would buy steadily, but we would supplement it with food from the garden. Like we had a bed that was potatoes not long ago, and we've just literally last week eaten the last of the potatoes. Certain vegetables like that, where you need a lot of space to grow a crop that would keep you through the winter, we focus on growing the nice new potatoes in the summertime, and then we would buy them locally for ourselves during the winter time. Cardboard, it's all of the food waste from the house, from the cottage, all of the weeds and other bits and pieces, prunings. I have a shredder which shreds everything up into small bits, so even branches from trees we can put in here. And that will go into here, and then it's moved next door to the next bay, and then it's moved into the final bay. And I can show you here, just very, I can reach some. So it becomes from, you can see there, it becomes a really nice organic mixture that can go straight back on the soil, and it's rich, and it's like 1 cubic centimeter. This is full of billions of different bacteria, but it's all good bacteria that helps the plants, helps them absorb the food from the soil, so it helps them grow better. So that just happens on a cycle every year. So I'm kind of a bit I enjoy composting. It's a fascinating subject. And when we build the heap for the first 2 or 3 weeks, it can actually reach about 60 or 70 degrees Celsius in the middle as all the bacteria gets active, and you know that that's killing weed seeds and harmful bacteria, but there's a whole process that it goes through that produces, you know, really good stuff. You can't buy it in the shops. It's better than anything you can buy in the shops. This is where all of the rubble and the soil and you wouldn't believe how much came out of the cottage, and it had to go somewhere. So we had a ditch at the front of the garden here. We put a big pipe in, and we put a lot of the rubble into there just to create a little bit more garden. But then it was piled up to where it was probably up to my head where I am here, and on the left, this whole area was it was a building site, and that was 2 years ago. So this is effectively it's a brand new piece of garden. We did have these plants planted. These are hazel, which we grow for poles for supporting climbing plants and so on, and supporting ornamental plants. We get poles off those every few years. They were the only plants that were here. So 2 years ago we created this area. We had a new septic tank put in, which is like it was this massive tank. It's about 6,000 litres. It's all buried under the ground. So that treats the sewage from the house and from the cottage. So this again was just a big hole. So this is the newest bit of the garden, which is just coming into use this year. So we've planted a few plants, so it'll take a few years before it becomes established. And we're still keeping the weeds under control. That's the thing at the beginning. Until we get the ground covered with plants, then the weeds will always want to fill the space. We planted these Christmas trees. These are Nordman fir. We planted these about 10 years ago. They're probably 10 years old. And the sewage comes in a pipe through here, so I had to leave a track because I always knew we were going to put the septic tank in here. So I had a mini digger digging a trench between the trees, and these trees will actually sell these for Christmas trees this year. Most of them, there's 1 or 2 still growing, but we've had Christmas trees in the house for the last 2 or 3 years from the garden. They're great trees. But
yes, they are very beautiful.
Yeah, if we leave them, they'll just become too big, and this will just become a forest. And our plan for this part of the area, as you can see here, we've planted a small tree here, and we have the hazel, which you can see is growing really well. So that produces the sticks for us for the garden. so we don't need to buy canes which would end up coming from China. We can just harvest our own from the garden. So this will be a woodland area, so we'll let some of the trees grow up, some of these smaller trees that we planted, and it also provides shelter because the wind comes from behind the camera there. So this can be, it's a beautiful day today, but in the middle of winter we could have 60-mile-an-hour winds blowing through here. So this helps to provide a buffer for the veg garden, which is also why we have the big hedge around the vegetable garden to try and just shelter it and keep a little bit of warmth in. The wind just blows all the heat away, so it tends to cool everything down, which again is an issue when you're trying to grow vegetables that like a little bit of warmth. And this one, whilst it's only gone in this year, it's very small. In a few years' time, this will be much taller. In fact, probably next year this will be taller than me. And then behind you there's another big, that's more of a shrub, and then there's a couple of small trees here, and you don't see them at the moment. There's another one the other side of the path that are very small at the moment because they're very new. So the idea is that these will grow up and they'll replace the Christmas trees as the Christmas trees come out, because this Christmas tree in a few years, I mean, it'll grow to 50, 60 feet or more, and it would dominate this part of the garden. So we're growing smaller shrubs and trees that are better for wildlife over the lifetime of the plant. So these will produce catkins, flowers, in the springtime, early in the springtime, which is great for early bees.
So the willow tree is growing that fast?
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing trees, you literally, these are a wee bit young, but you would take a cutting, which may be the length of your span of your hand, so about 8 to 9 inches. You cut it off, and then you just stick it in the ground and it grows. They're so easy to grow. And one of those plants will be 3 or 4 feet tall after 1 year. So if you then cut that back down, we call that coppicing, it would then send up more shoots from the base, and each year it could be taller than me. But very soon this whole ground will be covered with plants next year. And what we'll do is we come in and we'll edit things. We don't dictate what goes where, but what we'll do is we'll pull out a few of these weeds, but they're not really weeds, but we don't want them there. But we'll leave a few. We don't want all of these. If you leave all these, eventually your whole garden will be nothing but red campion. So we'll just edit it and remove a few plants. Again, they go in the compost heap, but they're free plants. They're plants that this one has reproduced. And we kind of just like that idea of the plants will find their own way, and we're just here to edit how we want it to be. You know, we're not trying to dictate everything, and we just work with nature rather than against it. So yeah, so there's a lot of plants that will do good, and most of what we plant here would be a mixture of, would be some native, like this is teasel. We collected seeds from a plant somewhere else in Northern Ireland when we were visiting a few years ago. We grew a few plants, and then they have these most magnificent seed heads which the goldfinches love during the winter. So they'll come and feed off these, and I mean, I don't think I've seen teasel grow this. They're sort of 8 feet tall, 2 meters tall. And then we leave the odd one. So this is a seedling from teasel. They're a biennial, so they grow leaves 1 year and then they flower the next year, and then they more or less die. You see, there's nothing left on this one. It won't grow back, but that'll be composted in the spring. We just cut it down, put it on the compost heap, and recycle it again. And this is a crabapple tree that was planted last winter, so again, it's only been in 1 year. And hopefully the birds will take those fruits in the winter time. So it's food for the birds, but they also look nice as well, and that'll fill this space. So this, for example, this is a Japanese maple that will fill up this space. So this is it goes bright red. So we choose plants again for their autumn colour, so that they're visually appealing all through the year. And then we've planted shrubs here. That's my office through that window, so I can look out into the garden. And this hedge was planted. We'll edit the hedge to allow this plant a little bit more space. We might take out one of the hedge plants at the end there to give this a little bit more space, but I'm going to take that hedge plant and plant it somewhere else. So I'm not going to waste it. And I'm lucky because I work from home, so I can go from my office to the garden and spend half an hour at lunchtime weeding or pruning or whatever's needed. So I'm very, very lucky in that respect.
Any plans for today for working in your garden?
Today, after our 12-year-old's birthday party, we'll probably come back and I might spend an hour or so in the afternoon. There's bits of weeding to do. We're digging a pond because water's really important in a garden. So that's the one thing that we don't have, apart from what comes out of the sky. We don't have a pond, and that's great for frogs. It's our only amphibian that lives here. And we find frogs in the garden and they lay their eggs in ditches and so on, but having a pond just means that we attract a lot more wildlife to the garden, dragonflies and damselflies. So I might dig a little bit more of the pond later on, and the plan is to have that finished by the springtime, ready for when the frogs will be looking for space to breed, so we could be having tadpoles in the garden next year. So we're always thinking ahead. There's always something in my mind to do later on, but there's always 10 things there, so depends on the weather, but today would be lovely to be out here. But again, we like the sort of, it's called naturalistic planting. We like the idea that things look a bit natural. They don't look like they've been planted. It looks like it's a community of plants that would normally grow together quite happily. We've introduced a lot of annuals in here to give us some colour for the first year. So the white flowers that you can see there, they're called cosmos. They are just an annual, so they'll drop seeds, so more may germinate for next year. But the perennials, the ones that grow year after year, and there's a number of grasses and other perennials that you can't really see because they're only in their first year, so they're still very small and young, that they'll take over next year.
So it is a good place for bees?
Oh, I've filmed a couple of these plants here. I can't remember which one. There's one over there, Viper's bugloss, I think you pronounce it. It's a native plant, and I was filming it in the summertime, just absolutely covered in bees, bumblebees and honeybees. They loved it. So yeah, we would have many butterflies and bees and so on. And you can see now we're in mid-October and there's still flowers. I know it's quite mild. Butterflies love this one. And again, a lot of these will seed. These will drop seeds this year. This is a verbena. They'll drop seeds. And then you find lots of little plants growing up, and again you can weed them out if you don't want them where they're growing, or you can leave them and they'll be there next year. And if they find their own place, it tends to look a bit more natural maybe than when if you plant it yourself. That's south, so south is where the sun would be, and our house is shading it at the moment. But as you can see, this was a sage, but the soil here is so wet. We get a lot of water coming off the field and running down the driveway. It was one of the issues with the cottage, was trying to keep the water away from the cottage. But we have some rosemary, some marjoram. There's chives there which come back every year. There's a sage here which has done remarkably well, so obviously the one down there didn't like it. This is also a rosemary, but it's one that grows very flat, so it kind of, I think it looks quite intriguing coming over the wall that we built. There's a little bit of thyme down there. And then, yeah, the idea is that people who come and stay in the cottage, and ourselves, we just nip out. If you want to make a tea or garnish your dinner or whatever, you can come and help yourself to whatever's out here. And then there's mint in the pots as well. Mint is so vigorous that we don't plant it. We don't plant it in the beds. So this one is, again, it doesn't look much at this time of the year. This one is Moroccan mint. You can smell it. So you can make great tea with that. I was in Morocco many, many years ago and probably drank so much Moroccan tea that I needed coffee after it, but it was great. And this is another mint. This is a woolly or an apple mint, I think, here. But again, at this time of the year, they don't look great, but you can always take a little bit, put it on the windowsill, and you've got herbs for the winter time. We take plants for granted. We don't appreciate what it is that they give us. Almost everything that we eat has plant-based in some way. Even the animals that we eat have been fed on plants. So, you know, it's really important to understand what they give us and how they work, and what benefits we can get from herbal plants and such like. That you know, there's a lot of things we don't yet understand about plants, and it's really interesting. There's a lot of information out there to learn from, and like anything, I'm still learning. I don't know half of what I would like to know.